Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, outfitted today by Johnny O. A couple of things here off the top. First of all, it's great to be back. Wonderful week last week on the DawgNation Cruise. We'll tell you more about that. Wish you could have been there with us. It's truly one of the special weeks we get a chance to have here as an organization, so we'll obviously do some celebrating about that here today and probably over the course of the next few days. A lot of good memories to go back and relive. But also this. Now, we're busy with Georgia football, and I promise we'll get to that. But it's always a fun day for me anytime we get a chance to welcome a brand new partner to our show. And, of course, it's especially fun for me when it is a brand that I love as much as I have loved Johnny O. I've worn all the Georgia apparel, and I would say that there is none better than what Johnny O certainly has provided. And so I'm proud today to be wearing Johnny O, and most importantly, proud to have Johnny O in the desk in front of me as our presenting sponsor here today. We'll tell you more about them if you're unfamiliar coming up in just a moment. Also, very busy week when it comes to the NFL draft. I think the NFL draft provides Georgia fans a lot to celebrate. We will certainly do that. And I think we'll ask a significant question as well about what it means for Georgia to see its overall draft haul a little less than it's sometimes been at a time in which some of the teams it's competing with seem to have more first-round picks than ever. And what does Georgia do in 2027 to get back into the national championship conversation using the NFL draft from last week as our guide for all of that? We'll touch on that here today, and we'll have Jon Stinchcomb. And by the way, big news involving John over the weekend. Of course, we'll talk about that as well. Plenty to do. Glad to have you with us for it. And for me personally, it's really great to be back. Looking forward to a fun week of shows here as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, outfitted today by Johnny O, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Johnny O, the go-to apparel brand for dogs who take their style as seriously as their football.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
What a thrill it is to be back after a wonderful DawgNation cruise, and we'll tell you more about that in a moment. Just an awesome experience. Wish all of you could have had it with us. Thankful that I got a chance to have it, and boy, it seems like every year, 5 great years of that event just gets better and better each year, and I'm proud to say that once again for 2026, that was no doubt true. But, of course, after a week of not having live shows, you better believe I am chomping at the bit to be back talking Georgia football with you. And I'll begin by saying, I think many of you are aware of this, that generally speaking for the upcoming season, the fall of 2026, when the season eventually gets here, I'm about as optimistic about Georgia as I've been really in a few years. I think on paper, this Georgia team looks like it could be really, really good. And look, predicting who's going to win the national championship is always a bit of a fool's errand. So it's almost a little safer to say, could this team be in that conversation and have a chance to do that? Of course they could. On paper, it seems like they're checking almost all of the boxes that you feel like need to be checked, pretty emphatically in most cases, of a team that has the look of a true, real championship contender. That is what Georgia could be this year. We're pretty optimistic about all of that. And yet, concurrent to that thought, I have to be honest about this, is that while generally speaking, I'm overall pretty optimistic about Georgia, there is one prevailing concern for UGA that won't quite go away from me. And I think that people oftentimes enjoy the optimism more than the concern. But if I'm going to do this show every day, we've now done it going on 11 years, if you're going to trust me when I tell you I feel good about something, I've got to be believable in that situation. And I'm only believable about the good stuff if I'm also honest about the concerns as well. And I do have to admit that in the age in which we live right now, there is one concern for UGA that's not quite going away from me. Now, there's a chance that it ends up not being that big of a deal, and there's a chance that, as we've said before, Kirby Smart can provide an emphatic answer to this question, but it is for me right now nonetheless a question. And the question is simply this: is Georgia spending enough money to keep pace with the other national championship contenders? We're told, and you can decide for yourself how much you believe on this, but so-and-so spending $40 million, this team may be spending $45 million. By this time next year, it may be $60 million. Who knows if that's true? But Georgia is, the way they would say, a lot more judicious with their spending. They may be, and once again, these are best guess based on, on the record reporting, to the extent we have some of that, they may be somewhere around $30 million. That may be about what Georgia's doing, about 2/3 of what some teams are spending, or to say it a different way, teams may be spending 50% more than UGA is, at least those at the top of the spending charts. And as I said, that leaves for me a lingering question of, well, in the NIL age in which we live in, if Georgia's spending that much less than some of the other teams that also aspire to win national championships, is Georgia spending enough? And I'm going to tell you, I think in some respects, that's what we're going to learn this season, because there's a very good chance that Kirby Smart can say, hey, I had what I need on my roster. We've made wise decisions about our money. We don't have to be desperate, because in some respects, some of the big NIL figures that you see thrown around are from a desperation of, we don't have so-and-so at whatever position. We've got to go out and grab a transfer. We've got to do this. We've got to fill holes, and we're desperate to fill those holes. So a little bit like anybody who gets into a late-stage negotiation situation, we may have to overspend to get what we need, because that's how desperate we are. Georgia's never quite been in a position of desperation. They may have truly put together a championship roster without having to, what we might describe as, overspend, bid against yourself. They may not have to do that. And as frequently happens around college football, when it is all said and done, Kirby Smart might truly get the last laugh on everybody when it comes to that kind of thing. And yet, you also look for evidence and for clues that Georgia, a little more judicious with its spending, a little more frugal perhaps with its payroll, is looking a bit different than it maybe did in the past in either the early stage of the NIL era or in some cases pre-NIL. Does Georgia look a little different as a program now than it did before? And this past week's NFL draft, I think, at least gives you, now it's not a flashing sign, it's not to the extreme, but it is, if you're paying close attention, a noticeable difference for Georgia in what it produced in this year's NFL draft compared to some of what it's produced in the past. Not anything to be ashamed of, and frankly, it's still among the very best in all of college football in terms of producing draft talent, but it was a little bit different for Georgia. Let me give you a couple of numbers here just for a moment. So in this past year's NFL draft, the one that just concluded on Saturday, Georgia produced 8 draft picks in total. That is tied for the 7th most in all of college football. Ironically, one of the teams it's tied with is Indiana, who won the national championship. And in the 8 draft picks that Georgia produced, one of those was a first-round pick. Now, Georgia's, in the last 5 years, if you want to go back and look, in 2025, it's 13 total draft picks, 3 first-rounders. In 2024, also 8 draft picks, but 2 of those were first-rounders. In 2023, that's coming off a national championship season. It's double-digit draft picks 10, 3 first-rounders. And, of course, in 2022, the high water mark for any team ever in the 7-round draft era, Georgia had 15 total draft picks, record. And among those 15, 5 first-rounders, all on defense. So hear what I'm saying and don't hear what I'm not. It is certainly not fair to compare Georgia to a record-setting performance of 2022 and say, you've got to be that every single year. That would be unfair. We're not really in the business of being unfair if we can help it. But it is, I think, fair to say, from where Georgia was in 2022 and then the following years after that Georgia is a bit lower than it once was. And does that suggest that the overall complexion of the Georgia roster is perhaps a bit different now because some of the teams it's competing with are just spending so much more? They're grabbing transfers. They are bringing in players that maybe in some past year would have been at Georgia. Now, there's also a flip side to this, too, and I want to acknowledge that. And some Georgia fans have pointed this out on social media or wherever else. Hey, the fact that Georgia was good enough to win the SEC, make the college football playoff, be in contention for the national championship, and only had 1 first-round pick, only had 8 draft picks in total, the fact that they had that much success on what was described last year as a young team, this NFL draft produced this NFL draft demonstrates that Georgia is so loaded with talent, young guys from a year ago, ready to blossom and become everything they can be in 2026. That also might be true for UGA. One of those two extremes. Either we're seeing an example here that Georgia is eroding somewhat with its overall talent, or we're seeing an example of, oh my gosh, if you didn't get Georgia in 2026, or I should say, if you didn't get Georgia in 2025, you really messed up because they are about to be loaded for bear in 2026. Maybe that other alternative is true too. But if that's going to be true, here's what needs to happen. And I'll explain it by pointing this out. Almost everybody has noticed, well, this past year, meaning last week, this past week's NFL draft, the 2026 NFL draft, the Big Ten had the most first-round picks, but the SEC had by far the most draft picks overall. And a lot of people in noticing that have said, well, that actually tells the story of the two leagues pretty well. That right now, the Big Ten probably is better at the top. They've won the last 3 national championships. But the SEC is deeper overall, and Georgia's certainly an example of that. Think about how busy Georgia was hearing its name called in night 2 of the NFL draft as a for instance on that. That does feel like a pretty good snapshot right now of where the Big Ten is. They, up at the top with their very best teams, have a great collection of elite talent. Ohio State, a really good example of that, all the first-round picks they produced. But the SEC is still deeper overall. And yet you can also reverse engineer that a bit too to say, okay, well, if Georgia, the team we care about, is going to make a move towards the top-end status that the best Big Ten teams have enjoyed over the course of the last 3 years, then Georgia needs to take some of its night 2 draft capital and turn that into more first-round picks for the 2027 NFL draft following the 2026 season. That's the next step for Georgia. That if Georgia is going to be back in the national championship conversation with the roster that it has right now, too young in many cases to be drafted a year ago, more seasoned and experience for 2026, if Kirby Smart wants to provide the emphatic answer of no, in this NIL age, when some teams are outspending us, and in 2026, some teams produce more draft picks than we did, we're still ready to go for 2027, and we're about to show the world that the 2026 season, the 2027 draft, we're about to show the world that, then as simple as this, you've got to take some of your draft prospects and make sure that a good number of these guys elevate to become actual first-round picks, that the best Georgia teams, the best college teams overall are just simply going to over-index when it comes to first-round picks. Doesn't have to be 5 the way that it was after the 2021 season, but it probably needs to be multiple, and that's mostly what Georgia's been doing. And in the 2026 season leading to the 2027 draft, Georgia needs to get back to the business of doing that again. So it seems fair to ask and fun to consider, well, where might that come from? And who might help Georgia show that it's still top dog, no pun intended, when it comes to the overall talent, and still inside track on chasing down national championships and all the other success that Georgia wants to enjoy? Who are some of the draft-eligible players for this upcoming season who could be potential first-round picks for 2027 and allow Georgia to restore itself as really the top program when it comes to producing talent overall in college football? There are potentially many names we could mention, but I want to highlight 3 for a second. And they're all on defense. And to me, they represent the kind of swing players that can really change the fortunes for Georgia and can really put Georgia back on top of college football here for this upcoming season. Let me start with Chris Cole. And Cole is an interesting player in that, in one respect, it's not even really obvious that he's a starter at Georgia necessarily, depending on how you define that. He's a versatile player for sure, but in a crowded inside linebacker room, sometimes he's going to be on the field, sometimes he might not be. But what makes Cole incredibly interesting, you already know this. He actually led Georgia in sacks a year ago, and a little bit like Jalen Walker, a former first-round pick, would have been after the 2025 season, I should say the 2024 season, after all these years get confusing, after the way that Walker emerged there as a Butkus Award winner and a first-round pick who could play inside, could play outside, the next version of that for Georgia could be Chris Cole. And make no mistake about it, Cole definitely could be a first-round pick by this time next year. And if that development fully takes shape, that's a great example of how the Georgia defense gets even better in the process and Georgia can return to what we think of as its national championship form. Now, speaking of the versatility of Cole, and maybe he plays inside, maybe he plays outside, maybe he plays in pass coverage, maybe he plays as a pass rusher. There are lots of different things he can do. You want to go back into the last season, Kirby Smart talked about that. Whether it be in a situational pass rushing role or a more traditional inside linebacker role, Georgia has found a lot of ways to use Cole in the past, and you presume there's probably even more of this coming in the future. This is Kirby from last season.
He's been great. He's taken on 3 roles. He takes on a role as a sub pass rusher, a normal down inside backer, and a normal down regular personnel Sam backer. And that's 3 pretty different, very distinct roles that he takes on. And we have to find ways to keep utilizing Chris's strengths. He has strengths that we have to utilize, and he's a good playmaker. So I'm proud of the way he's practicing and playing.
I'm going to oversimplify this just for a moment. Look, there's a lot of things that Chris Cole does well, and Georgia's thankful, I believe, to have all that versatility. But if we're talking about Chris Cole getting his name called by Roger Goodell on a Thursday night this time a year from now, the thing that's going to make him a first-round pick is his pass rushing abilities. Seems to be a very good pass rusher. Georgia has said repeatedly this spring they want more of that. They want to be a better pass rushing team, be more disruptive. That's what Cole seems well positioned to be able to do. So for all the things that Cole does well, if you want to make him into a better player, if you want to make your defense into a better unit, leaning into Chris Cole as a pass rusher is one of the things that Georgia needs to do. And if so, he could be one of those guys, instead of being a day 2 pick next April, you're talking about a first-round draft pick, and Georgia would certainly benefit from that. Another example of this, and this just may be on the verge of happening, and if it is, it's going to change, I think, everything about the Georgia defense. There is a very good chance that Ellis Robinson's moment has really arrived, and that Robinson is about to be one of college football's best cornerbacks. I'm a big believer that cornerback is a premium position. It's the sort of position that generates a lot of first-round picks across college football every single year. And if you've got the true lockdown corner, then, boy, you put the job of a pass rush just gets a little bit easier, because all of a sudden now quarterback doesn't quite see somebody on that side of the field open to throw to, which maybe cause him to hold on to the ball for a half second longer. And all of a sudden now that Chris Cole-style pass rusher just has a little bit better chance of getting to the quarterback. That if you really do have a first-round level cornerback, you've really got a lot. Now, we believe in DeMello Jones as well, but it seems like early buzz right now when it comes to the NFL draft is probably more around Ellis Robinson. Some of that's because of what his recruiting ranking was, but it's not all just manufactured out of whole cloth. Some of it's also because of the growth that we saw Robinson take and generate as a player in the 2025 season. So much so that the Football Writers Association honored him as the Freshman of the Year, which was technically also open to redshirt freshmen as well. And so DawgNation was down there in Florida a couple of months ago when Robinson was honored with that award, got a chance to speak exclusive to Kirby Smart about it. At the time, Kirby talked about the way in which Robinson's grown as a player. When you hear him say all of this, it's not hard for a Georgia fan to use his imagination and conclude, you know what? If you're looking for first-round picks on next year's team to get Georgia back in the business of generating first-round picks the way that it often has in the past, Robinson's a beautiful candidate to do that. This is what Kirby Smart said about Ellis in the season he just had not all that long ago.
He developed himself. He was really talented coming in. I mean, he had a skill set that we haven't had in a while in terms of coverage ability. We had some good players when he was a freshman that he was competing with. They made him get better each and every day. And then to watch him last spring, the growth he had, we knew right away in the end of the spring last year that we had a bona fide starter, a really good player. And then he played to that level and expectations. He makes people pay when they make mistakes. He's a really good tackler. He can cover man-to-man. He's got extreme confidence. And we talk about all the time, how do you play with your back to the ball? And he's one of the best corners I've ever coached with his back to the ball. He can finish well. He doesn't panic. And that proved out this year on some of the high-level receivers he was able to cover.
Let me just say this. Kirby Smart's coached for a very long time, almost all that time on defense. And in addition to being a defensive mastermind, Kirby Smart also loves secondary play, loves it. Most of you know that. So if Kirby Smart says about any player, he's one of the best cornerbacks I've ever coached when it comes to ... Whatever that sentence finishes with, that is a significant statement for someone like Kirby to make, just simply because of how much he loves the defensive side of the ball, secondary in particular. If you're saying that kind of stuff, then you're certainly saying something big about Ellis Robinson. That may not be an overstatement at all. He may be on his way to being that guy, and if so, Georgia really benefits from that, because it's one thing to produce first-round picks. It's another thing to produce them at the actual premium positions, such as cornerback. That may be what Ellis becomes. And then to finish this topic off, I'll stay in the secondary for a moment, because on paper to begin the season, if you polled the ball knowers out there, people outside the bubble of DawgNation who just, whatever player evaluations they want to make, on paper right now, the guy believed to be the best player in the Georgia roster for the most part is probably thought to be K.J. Bolden. You might get some other considerations. Some people might even say Drew Bobo. But if you're looking overall at on paper right now who Georgia's best player is to begin this season, when it comes to preseason accolades and the stuff that goes along with that, it's probably K.J. Bolden. And we always say, could Bolden be for Georgia what Caleb Downs proved to be from Ohio State? We saw Caleb Downs be among the many first-round picks for Ohio State just this past week. Could Bolden be the next in line with that? Well, certainly it seems like he certainly could be, and I'm guessing for Georgia to be everything it wants to be, he probably should be as well. And so if we're making a list of most likely guys who could step up and become first-round picks, I do believe that K.J. Bolden is going to be on that list. And obviously Georgia's already gotten a lot out of K.J. in 2 years here with the program, but could get even more this upcoming season. In fact, if you want to go back and think about some of the things that KJ has said, he certainly sees the way that he's grown up from a guy that just seems like 5 minutes ago was playing at Buford High School. Now we're talking about him as a draft-eligible player for Georgia this season. Over the course of that time, he's not only been good on the field, it also seems like he's matured when it comes to his stature within the program. Now a true, genuine leader who could lead this Georgia defense to good things this season. This is what KJ has said in the past.
First year having not to be able to speak as much, just learning, processing everything from the older guys. This year, just taking on the leader role a little bit. It's definitely been challenging, but it's fun at the same time. I feel like Malachi and Dan definitely prepared me the right way to lead the group, and I'm just trying to lead the way lead the way they did. Feel me, just push the guys every day. Just telling the guys how important it is. You feel me, just to work hard and just the little things matter. So it's definitely been fun.
So there you have it from me. 3 guys I think that could play their way into the first round based on how the 2026 season goes. K.J. Bolden, Ellis Robinson, and Chris Cole. And if they do, all of a sudden Georgia's back in the business of being up, I would say, at or near the top when it comes to the overall draft picks produced. So let me try to sum all of this up this way. I do have a small concern for Georgia. In a day and age in which the spending is wild and some would say out of control, is Georgia spending enough to keep pace with the very best? And does Georgia's overall compensation for its roster this season keep it in the discussion of teams that can win the national championship? I do believe we're about to find out. But to put a positive spin on this, to wrap it all up, you have to go all the way back to the 2021 NFL draft to find the last time that Georgia only had one first-round pick. Kind of a long time ago now. It's been a while since Georgia only had one first-round pick. Do you know what Georgia did the following fall? They won the national championship, and they set a draft record for the most picks ever, including the 5 first-rounders. The same thing could be true again. That concern, legitimate perhaps now, gets emphatically answered once the games get played. Georgia's done that before, and this fall could be ready to do it again. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, outfitted today by Johnny O. Let me just say this for a moment. One of the things that I'm really lucky about around here, a lot of you know who these brands are. Obviously, we're in business to do business, got a lot of sponsors that we like to take care of, but so many times in the past, the companies we've gotten a chance to work with have been companies that I already had a great relationship with and was a big fan of. Like I said before, some of you know who some of those companies have been for us in the past. But today, to welcome in Johnny O to this show, is just a huge thrill for me. An incredible treat because I have worn all of the Georgia apparel. All the famous makers who make the apparel, I think I've just about worn it all. And I'm going to tell you right now, there is none that I've liked better than Johnny O. I happen to be, for watching a video, wearing a Johnny O shirt today, and I knew we'd be wearing one, but I did not know they're going to make some special DawgNation branded Johnny O apparel to be wearing today. So I've got the Johnny O logo and the DawgNation logo on my shirt today. And I would say that Johnny O, the reason why I like it so much is it probably blends the two things that I would say probably define my personality from a fashion sense probably as much as anything. I'm kind of a preppy guy, and Johnny O definitely has the East Coast prep thing going on, but also it's got the coastal vibe as well, kind of like the West Coast coastal beach type vibe going on as well. That's why you have the surf logo. It's just a good blend of the things that I like. And I got to tell you, it's incredibly comfortable as well. And it's really, it's a thoughtful thing too, because look, when you wear like the golf style polos, things like that, sometimes you get this thing with the button where like one button's not quite buttoned up enough. Two buttons, you feel like it's kind of choking a little bit. The way in which the buttons are positioned on the shirt give it a good look without getting too tight around the neck. It just looks relaxed. That's the whole thing about Johnny O. They just want it to be relaxed when it comes to all of that. So a big fan. They got the game day apparel, obviously, for Georgia, but you can also get this made when it comes to all the other sports as well. So many others like NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, PGA Tour, and of course, all the Georgia branded gear you're ever going to want to get. Big fans. They've been doing this for more than 20 years. I've been a fan of it the last few years. Of all the stuff that I've worn, whether it be Georgia apparel or just regular golf apparel or regular stuff you want to wear to work every day, really from a comfort standpoint, how it looks, Johnny O is just going to get it done for you. When you use the promo code DawgNation at their site, actually DawgNation10. Let's make sure we give this right. When you use the promo code DawgNation10 at their site, you're going to get 10% off your first order. So make sure you use the promo code DawgNation10, 10% off your first order. They want to give you a nice welcome opportunity to save there as we welcome on Johnny O here to DawgNation Daily here today. Thrilled to have him. Love wearing the Johnny O shirt. In fact, if you saw us on one of our cruise shows last week, I was wearing a Johnny O shirt for that. So I've been a big fan of Johnny O for a long time, but now thrilled to have him as a part of what we're doing here on DawgNation Daily. What a fun thing that is to welcome him into the program here today. All right, speaking of welcome folks to the program, we're going to get Jon Stinchcomb in a moment. Big announcement for Jon over the course of the weekend. We'll have some fun with that. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse here today, driven by our friends at Ed Voiles Hyundai. Let me bounce through a couple of things here. We're going to cover a lot of bases here, covered by and presented by Ed Voiles Hyundai just for a moment. Starting with, as I mentioned before, what a week it was for our DawgNation Cruise. Hundreds of Georgia fans are a part of that. We had such a great time. I wish that everybody could have seen that. We'll show you some of the video to give you a chance to experience this. Just amazing every single year. And, so many folks behind the scenes for us make that possible. Faraday and Caitlin came on the cruise for the first time this year. Obviously, Casey does so much for us when it comes to that. And, of course, on the DawgNation folks, well, Cody and Kaylee and Mike and Jeff, people that just work very hard to make that an awesome experience. And it was just such a thrill to share that with all of them here once again for our DawgNation Cruise here this year. And to the hundreds of folks who joined us on board and were a part of that with us, man, I was just so thankful to be able to do that and thought this year's cruise was as good as any we'd ever done. Just an incredible experience. So awesome. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about that in the days to come. But just a great thing, our DawgNation Cruise for 2026. What a great way it was to be able to celebrate on all of that. And by the way, speaking of celebration, let me also mention the Diamond Dogs here for a moment. How about 2 of 3 for them over the course of the weekend against Ole Miss? And that's an even bigger deal given the fact that, game 1 in the doubleheader on Saturday, Georgia's got the big 8-0 lead, ends up coughing up the lead, losing that game. But then to bounce back and win the next couple after that. This is the 6th SEC series win for Georgia thus far this year. And I got to tell you, this is a team right now that has a real look of, when you're winning this way in SEC play right now, in a time in which I just saw Tim Corbin the other day, the Vanderbilt coach, talk about how, the SEC is almost so bunched up. It's a little bit like what Major League Baseball for the most part is. But certainly Georgia is, right now, they are not bunched up. Right now, Georgia's finding a way to get that rubber match win in these series that it's playing, and they deserve a lot of credit for this. This is a team that could absolutely be in Omaha. They are doing some very big things here right now. So wanted to take a moment to mention the fact that it was quite a weekend for the Diamond Dogs in Oxford against Ole Miss, perhaps a precursor to a team that could go to Omaha. This is a Georgia baseball team that's playing very well right now and certainly deserving of your attention. Also, while we're doing a little news and notes type stuff, I made mention of the fact that Jon Stinchcomb was a part of a big announcement over the weekend. I'm looking forward to talking to Jon about this in just a moment. But Jon going to be a part of the UGA radio broadcast this fall. It came out Friday, relatively late in the day. Interesting announcement and timing on the part of Georgia, but brand new radio broadcast team for this fall. Jeff Dantzler, who many of you know, I've known Jeff for a long time. I like Jeff a lot. Jeff obviously loves the Dogs. Been around Georgia broadcast. A lot of you know him from speaking of the baseball, doing the baseball games, women's basketball games, and just being a big figure around the Georgia program for quite some time. I know it's a dream come true for him to get a chance to step into that play-by-play role for the football radio broadcast. And we were thrilled to hear Jon Stinchcomb announced as the brand new color analyst for those games too. Jon, a lot of you may not realize this because we don't always talk a ton about this, but Jon has been doing analyst work as the color analyst for his NFL team, the New Orleans Saints, during that preseason games. You know how like the NFL teams have their local preseason broadcast. Jon's been doing the color analyst work for that for a very long time. So he's got a lot of experience in the booth. He also knows the Georgia program up one side and down the other. So we couldn't be happier for Jon. I can't wait to talk to him about this in a moment. But just a really, really awesome thing for our guy Jon Stinchcomb, and we're happy to celebrate that with him coming up in a moment. But before we do, let me do one more thing. I'm jealous of this because I wanted to go to this so bad, just didn't get a chance to. They had the Sanford Stadium concert on Saturday. Luke Bryan, Jason Aldean, Zach Top is one of the opening acts. I like Zach Top a lot. I'd love to have seen him. But obviously Aldean and Luke Bryan, huge Georgia fans, and obviously wanting to, you know, as we get into an age in which all teams looking to generate as much revenue as they possibly can, of course Jason and Luke are going to try to do what they can for the team they love, the Georgia Bulldogs. By everything I've heard, it was a great concert. I really wish I could have been there. Our friend Olivia Sayer was there. Some of y'all know Olivia. Our friend Olivia Sayer was there, and she was just enjoying it just as a ticketed patron, if you will. And she had some great video of Luke and Jason calling Kirby Smart onto the stage. I thought this was really fun to give you an example of what we all missed if you weren't there. On a great night for Georgia at Sanford Stadium, here around the Doghouse, driven by Ed Voiles Hyundai, can we see Kirby Smart on stage with Luke Bryan and Jason Aldean just for a moment? This is coming from our friend Olivia Sayer.
The bigger question is, how do you feel about the upcoming football season?
Love it. Hey, Jason, Luke, can y'all play some She's Country? She's Country. Let's go, Dawg. Here we go.
I love that Jason Aldean asked Kirby Smart about the upcoming season as if it was a press conference, and Kirby just sailed on right past that. Like Kirby's not there to break down the team, even with Jason Aldean, but certainly seemed to be having a good time, and honestly looked great. And awesome video from Olivia. Y'all can check her out on Twitter for more of that. Really looked good. Everybody seemed to be having a good time. I wish I was there. Just couldn't quite make that work so quick coming off the DawgNation Cruise, but it seemed like everybody's having a really good time with all of that. We'll make that around the Doghouse, driven today by our friends at Ed Voiles Hyundai. And of course, we love around the Doghouse. We love our friends at Ed Voiles Hyundai there as well, because we love the fact that so many folks in our audience are getting a chance to get great savings as it comes from Ed Voiles Hyundai on a awesome vehicle, of course, that being Hyundai. And when it comes to Hyundai, of course, you already know this, no better warranty opportunity out there than the one they are providing. I'm talking about 10 years, 100,000 miles. You can also get rates right now from our friends at Ed Voiles Hyundai as low as 0%. So that's a great way to save on your payment. And it's a great way to work with a dealership that's been entrenched in our market area for as long as anybody. I'm talking about like 70 years. They've been doing all of this, and that's what they are all about. So I want you to make sure you check them out today. It's voileshyundai.com/DawgNation. Voiles is spelled Voyles. Hyundai is Hyundai. voileshyundai.com/DawgNation. There's a lot of places you can buy a car, but for me, if I'm going to be doing that, I'm going to want dealership that's been around, people that know me, people that I can know, people that are a part of the community, and that's exactly what Ed Voiles Hyundai is. They've been supporting Marietta City Schools, Cobb County Schools for a long time, taking care of first responders, taking care of people in that community. These are real folks, real dealership. You can walk in, have a conversation with them, and that's what it's all about. And they're giving you great savings right now, especially when you use the special site, voileshyundai.com/DawgNation. That's just for you to get even better savings on top of the deal you're already getting. voileshyundai.com/DawgNation for more on that. All right, big weekend for our guy, Jon Stinchcomb. We want to celebrate that good news with him. Let's do that right now, here today on DawgNation Daily, outfitted by Johnny O.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I had just gotten back from the DawgNation Cruise and probably a little, groggy from traveling, and obviously the cruise takes a lot out of you in a good way, but laying on my couch, I'm kind of tired and scrolling the phone as I often do, and boom, there it pops up. Huge announcement. Jon Stinchcomb now part of the Georgia radio broadcast for 2026. Jon, I have to say, first of all, congratulations. Could not be happier. No better person for this job than you, we believe. What did it feel like to have this come out? And I guess if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about how this came together.
Absolutely. Well, I'm certainly excited about it and appreciate the opportunity. The response from friends and fans has been fantastic. I appreciate all the folks that have reached out far and wide. So it happened quickly. I got a call late Thursday night with the offer and didn't really commit to it. Had to talk through it with my family. Obviously, that's a big commitment in the fall, but one that is super exciting and a unique opportunity. So I didn't actually say yes till about 4:00 on Friday, and about 4:30 the press release came out. So it all happened really quick. I was, as we talked about a little bit last week, on Friday night was the NG3 banquet. I was trying to get ready for a little Q&A session with Nate Frazier, and that's where my head was. And all night long, I just my phone was constantly vibrating with folks that had seen the news and wanted to reach back out. So happened quick, but super excited about it. Looking forward to just going in depth for Georgia football on Saturdays in the fall.
Yeah, and I mentioned this before you came on. A lot of people don't realize this. I mean, you're qualified already because of your knowledge of Georgia, but you've actually done a good bit of analyst work. We don't talk about this very much because it doesn't fit what we do here, but for a long time, local broadcast, the New Orleans Saints during the preseason, you've been the television analyst for that. So the analyst chair is something that you've been in a good bit before, not just talking football on here, but actually doing the color analyst work on those Saints broadcasts, right?
That's probably where I feel most comfortable, and doing Saints broadcasts for years, just in the preseason. I really enjoy breaking down the game as it's unfolding. Obviously, it's been primarily TV work. I used to do the Voodoo while I was still playing the arena team in New Orleans.
Is that right?
During the off season. Yep, they let us come out, and that's where I started to cut my teeth, if you will, in the analyst role during a game, and had a lot of fun with it and look forward to doing it more. Obviously, more experience in the TV world than radio, but just enjoy the live in action breakdown and commentary, and try to give some insight to fans as to what they might miss or where they can direct their eyes and appreciate and enjoy the game in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you that I didn't know we had this in common. One of my first jobs was also on the Arena League as well. I did some sidelines for the old Georgia Force, and boy, you're talking about a different brand of football. That was a different brand of football to be sure, but that's one of the places where I cut my teeth doing some Arena League action. I don't even know if the Arena League is even still a thing. It's certainly not still a thing the way it once was. I'm guessing there may be indoor football somewhere else, but that is definitely one of the ways in which I came up doing little sidelines for some Arena League games, what feels like 1,000 years ago.
Isn't it a great experience? I mean, it's certainly a different game. It was like speedball with a little mix of boxcar derby crashes. I mean, it was fun just to watch the speed at which they play. And, it's like a hybrid. It's almost like when you've watched a few weeks back when they had the flag football game and you had the
Yeah.
NFL players with some of the pros, and you recognize this is a different animal. And, for guys that have excelled, Saquon Barkley on a Sunday, I don't know if there's a better running back in the league, and you put him on a flag football field and you say maybe his skill set doesn't transfer quite as well. He can't truck the linebackers in flag football the way he does on an NFL Sunday. So recognizing the differences, it's certainly there, and I enjoy the different variations of football, but there's nothing quite like college football on a Saturday, and specifically Georgia football. So it's something that I'm most familiar with, and look forward to being able to comment and share some analysis through the radio broadcast.
Let me do one more on this, then I want to change the subject. But you mentioned the radio broadcast. When I was coming up as a Georgia fan, the radio broadcasts meant a lot to me. There was a time in which not every game was on television. Games that were on television that we didn't travel to go see, turn the radio down, you listen to the radio broadcast, that I think there are a lot of Georgia fans about my age, or perhaps a little older, where there's an intimate relationship there. And frankly, I still feel that way about sports in general. I like listening to sports on the radio. That there's an intimate relationship there with radio in particular. What does that mean to you to know that you're carrying on a tradition that honestly has meant a lot to a lot of people for a very long time? Not just Georgia football, but in particular Georgia football on the radio.
Well, it undeniably has galvanized games. You look at, if I were to refer to a Tennessee game in 2002, folks are going to try to scratch their heads. If I say the Hobnail Boot game,
Yeah.
then obviously it draws out, everyone has a pretty good idea of what we're talking about. And,
Right.
or Sugar's Fallen from the Sky, or My God, a Freshman. I
Yeah.
mean, so many great calls that came from Larry, and then Scott Howard for years did such an incredible job, and so many calls that you associate those games with that broadcast. Just to be a part of it is exciting for me. I know so many fans will watch games and have their headsets or headphones on, listening to the radio broadcast in concert, if you will. So there's a lot of history there, and I'm excited about just being in the side seat, riding shotgun with Dantzler as we get to participate in creating memories for Georgia fans for years to come.
No, I think that's great. You mentioned the event that you recently did with Nate Frazier. I've had a chance to interview Nate a couple of times. And I tell you, one of the most thoughtful guys, interesting answers, like just a genuine guy. Like everything that he says just feels like it comes from a very real place. I'm a massive fan of Nate Frazier. If you don't mind, tell us a little about the event that you did with him and how you found Nate with your own personal interaction with him.
Isn't it fun? I mean, it's always
Yes.
great. Yeah, as a Georgia fan, you look from the outside, you're excited when we've got really talented players wearing red and black. And it's even better when you get to meet them and realize that they're just great guys.
Yes.
And Nate Frazier certainly falls into that category. I didn't know him well. He came highly recommended. NG3 is the nonprofit group that I've been with for basically since I got done playing in the NFL. And we provide small group mentorship and character development for schools, high schools, and invite them into some faith-based growth and small group opportunities off campus. So Nate came and shared a little bit about his testimony and what God's done in his life. And faith and sports and where those two intersect and how that's a huge piece. You see him after he scores touchdowns and he's celebrating in the end zone. One of the first things he does is point to the sky and recognizes that it's the God-given ability that
Right.
he's been able to utilize. And just it was a great evening where he got to share, and it was a real blessing for the folks in the crowd to hear him, hear from him, hear a little bit about Georgia football, but much more of learning what God's done in his life. So I appreciate him coming out. It was fun to interact. It was funny, BA. We're talking before we go up on stage, and I said, being a California kid, what do you really know about some of Georgia's history? So to hear some of the names that he knew,
He knows it, man.
would put a smile on your face. Obviously the AJ Greens and the Matthew Staffords, but he was able to reach back in the well. Hines Ward, and now that Robert Edwards is helping out with the running backs, it was kind of a wide cross section of folks that in Georgia history and Georgia lore that he was able to point to. So it was a lot of fun.
No, I tell you, we are just massive fans of his for all the reasons you just mentioned, and just an easy guy to cheer for. A guy that just seems to live in such a good emotional way. Just seems to, like I said, just a genuine guy. We are very, very big fans of Nate Frazier, and happy to hear that you had a successful event with him. Let me bring you into the topic of Georgia football that we're having before you joined us, because, look, as I said before, I have concurrent thoughts happening with Georgia. On the one hand, I'm very optimistic about Georgia for the upcoming season. On the other hand, I do have some questions. I guess I consider myself a curious person. I guess I'm always going to have questions. I do wonder how well Georgia is keeping pace with some of the other teams around college football, given that we have reason to believe it's not spending quite as much as some of the other teams are spending. And the NFL draft, not a bad performance for Georgia. 8 draft picks, the same as the national champion from this year. It's also tied for 7th most in all the draft here this season. So certainly nothing to be ashamed of, and probably unfair to always say you got to have double digits each and every year. But it is a little less than we've seen from Georgia, just the 1 first-round pick. And I would say that if Georgia's going to get back into the national championship conversation for the 2026 season, then the 2027 NFL draft probably needs to have a few more first-round picks. You probably need to have a little more high-end draft capital. Is that an unfair statement to make in your eyes, John?
I agree that no team is bulletproof anymore. I don't think that Georgia can develop the depth. But yet you watch the G-Day game and you go, man, there's a lot of players that were young last year that we get to see, and I'm excited excited to see what they can do given the opportunity, given the 1 year more of development that they faced. Another thing that you have to recognize coming out of that NFL draft this past week is the SEC does not have the lock on the top end talent like they did. The other teams, Indiana is a great example, that's willing to spend. Ohio State's willing to spend to recruit and get some players that they're not cultivating. Other programs are growing, and then they're willing to poach, if you will, and pay for these transfers to come in and be competitive at a high level. So there's, I think, aspects of college football that you have to recognize the changing landscape and adapt to it. I'm sure Georgia would have loved to have added another key playmaker in certain position groups. I think we tried to do that with Amaris Williams, and unfortunately he goes down with an ACL before we really even get to see what he can bring to the field. But if nothing else, you look at the draft and recognize, 1, Georgia's still at the top. 2, we return a number of players that was huge this year. So part of the transfer portal is not only adding pieces, but minimizing the loss from some of your best players. And I think that's a win that sometimes probably gets overlooked for Georgia, is that we didn't lose out on some of the players that we've invested in for a year or two, a season or two, that could have very easily entered the transfer portal, looked at greener pastures or greener pockets in other places, but decided to stay here. Linebacking core is a great example. Secondary, where we retained some players that very easily could have gone to a different team for probably a bigger payday and opted to stay a part of this Georgia program. So yes, I agree that you look at the transfers that teams were able to find, and Georgia has not taken a dive quite as deep as some of the other teams. You look at the 4 from the college football playoffs this last year, 2/3 of them are from transfer players, but Georgia has been able to retain guys that I think they would have loved to have picked up had they ever entered the transfer portal. Long way of saying, I think Georgia's in a really good spot. I like what we have. It's not a bulletproof roster. There's plenty of position groups that some young players are going to have to step up and prove themselves and as somewhat unproven commodities at this point. But I think there's a lot to be excited about as a Georgia program.
Let me squeeze in one more before we let you go. Monroe Freeling obviously goes in the first round. The 6th offensive tackle to be taken in the first round since Kirby Smart's been head coach, and that's only since 2016. John, that seems like a lot. And I got to tell you, when we're talking about why Georgia's been able to have the success that it's had in this span of time, I really think this is going to be a big part of it. To have first-round level offensive tackles, I think just changes everything about how your offense does its business. And Freeling, I thought, had an outstanding year. The fact that that pipeline has been so open for Georgia with numerous offensive line coaches over the course of that time, and yet the results pretty consistent. 6 first-round offensive tackles, to me, is just a lot. Man, I think that's going to be a big part of the story of why Georgia's been able to do what it's been able to do, right?
1 out of every 3 picks in the top 20 almost went for an offensive tackle, and wide receivers was another position group that it seems like they were constantly calling the name of another wide receiver that was going early and often. So I think you look at it and see how the game has evolved and recognize that those are key positions that I also think there was a separation in talent. If you're looking at this particular draft class of tackles that had that high-end ability, and there was a drop-off. So you get past the top 8 offensive tackles and you recognize the development that needs to occur. For Georgia fans, I think we all know, probably more so than most, that Monroe was a relatively young starter for us. He wasn't one of those guys that played 50 games over a course of a long career. That part of what Carolina is getting is someone with a high ceiling with a lot of space left before he reaches his best ball. And I think that's part of what Georgia is doing, is we recognize players that have those really high ceilings. That we want them to be a part of Georgia, and we're trying to get them as maxed out as possible, but also recognizing for guys like that, as we recruit these, high ceiling, top round quality players, we're trying to get them as developed as quickly as possible, because that the NFL is calling, and there's only so much time that we have with them before they're going to walk right back out the door and head to that next level. So it's important. It's obviously near and dear to my heart that you have to have really good players at that position for you to be able to execute the offense that you want to. And Monroe is a great example of a guy that represented Georgia well, and we need more of, and comes from a long line of tackles. I mean, dating back to Andrew Thomas and others that have been in between during this Kirby Smart era of really high-end tackle play. I think that's a main reason why Georgia's had the success that we've had in the national championships and the conference championships, is really good offensive line play, and we need to continue to keep it at a high level, and that's the standard.
Well, John, we appreciate your time, and sure enough, we could not have been happier to hear the news. What a great addition to the broadcast team for Georgia. Thrilled about that for you, and we appreciate you being here today on DawgNation Daily, outfitted by Johnny O.
I appreciate it, BA. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, couldn't happen to a better guy. We love John, and we think he's a great addition and just awesome things there coming for Jon Stinchcomb this fall, and I know Georgia fans are going to enjoy all of that too. That said, let's get ready to transition now and do our SEC through. And it was obviously, and we always view the NFL draft from a college football lens. We're always looking to see how many draft picks does Georgia produce, how many draft picks does the SEC produce overall. And along those lines, there are a couple of interesting numbers that I want to spend some time with here for a moment. First of all, the SEC's 87 total draft picks are the most ever by a conference. Some of that probably comes with an asterisk because conferences are just bigger now than they used to be. So the SEC's got 16 teams now, makes it easier to produce a number like 87. But beyond that, there are a couple of other numbers that I do think really matter given the ongoing conversation that's taking place around college football. Let me start with something that Peter Burns had. It's the 20th straight year the SEC's had the most total picks. Now, keep in mind, SEC did not have the most first-round picks this year. The Big Ten had that. So if you're looking for more evidence that things really have changed a little bit and the SEC's stranglehold over college football has slipped, it's not just the national championships, it's also the first-round picks too, that there is a strong connection between teams' elite draft capital and also winning national championships. The Big Ten continues to prove that. So give them their due. They had the most first-round picks. For a third straight year, they had the national champion. But for the 20th straight year, the SEC had the most total picks. Now, here is in the conversation of SEC and Big Ten where I think it gets really interesting, and this is the stuff that did not get a fair enough hearing by the national media when the conversation first started happening about should it be an 8-game or a 9-game conference schedule for the SEC. As Burns puts on Twitter, the SEC with 16 teams had 12 teams with at least 4 players drafted. The Big Ten, by comparison, total of 18 teams in that league, had 8 teams with at least 4 players drafted. So the Big Ten, despite being the bigger overall league, had far fewer teams with at least 4 players drafted. In fact, the SEC had 50% more of those than the Big Ten had. He also says that 75% of the SEC teams had at least 4 players drafted. Just 44% of the Big Ten teams had at least 4 players drafted. But maybe a more interesting number than that comes via Twitter from a guy called SEC Numbers Guy. I presume this is accurate. He puts out there that Ohio State had in 2025 the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. During its 9-game conference schedule, they faced a total, he says, of 26 total draft picks. By comparison, Texas A&M had the easiest SEC schedule. During their 8 conference game, they faced a total of 40 NFL draft picks. So, shorter schedule, easier compared to hardest, and A&M still played far more total draft picks than Ohio State did, despite playing what he calls the Big Ten's toughest schedule. So here's why all of this matters. What folks in the SEC were trying to point out is, even with the league playing an 8-game conference schedule, it was still a harder schedule than the Big Ten was playing with a 9-game conference schedule. And all the math nerd guys who do the efficiency ratings and things like that, the Bill Conleys and the whatnot, they were also pointing this out too, but it got completely ignored in this discussion. Frankly, I don't think the SEC gets a very fair shake when it comes to the national media on a lot of this. This was another example of that. And if the analytic stuff about why the SEC teams are power rated on average higher than the Big Ten teams are, if that's confusing for people, hard to understand, this should not be. That the average SEC team on a given Saturday, even playing an 8-game conference schedule, is just playing more NFL talent on the other side of the field than the average Big Ten team is. And this is why the SEC coaches were so upset about going from an 8-game to a 9-game conference schedule. And the point of all of this is simply this. Here is why this matters to you as a fan. That the SEC's bad decision, and I do believe that Greg Sankey got played. Frankly, if you're not questioning Greg Sankey's leadership right now, if you're not questioning Greg Sankey's stewardship as the top guy of the SEC, I don't think you're paying attention. Greg Sankey's ill-advised decision to push ahead with a 9-game conference schedule without the playoff expansion that SEC coaches were told was coming with all of this is now setting off a chain reaction of events that I think is going to leave college football in a far worse place. I've told you before, I am quite concerned about the possible expansion to 24 teams for the college football playoff. I'm quite concerned with that. But it certainly seems like that's where we're going. It certainly seems like, based on some reporting from Ross Dellinger last week, that is where all of this is heading. And when you get there, too much of a good thing potentially. When we look back and say, how did all of this happen? I think a lot of this is going to trace back to the SEC coaches' argument they've made in private that it was not given proper consideration, that even with an 8-game conference schedule, we're playing tougher schedules than the Big Ten and certainly these other leagues that are barely even worthy of being in the same conversation right now. But it just didn't get a fair hearing. You can't trust the media to do this for you. The media's not going to help you with this. They're just not. And whatever reason that is, you can figure that out on your own. But they're not going to help. They are not going to be an ally in making the public more aware of what the average SEC team looks like compared to the average Big Ten team. They're just not going to do it. If they were, they already would have. So the SEC coaches behind the scenes are screaming bloody murder about the fact that you're taking what's already the toughest conference schedules. Now you're making them tougher. And to their point, we get nothing for that. So that sets the chain reaction of events in motion that's eventually going to result in, at least based on Dellinger's reporting last week, it seems like the White House is getting involved on this, the movement towards a 24-team playoff. And what ought to scare you at least a little bit is that the call that took place last week where this momentum is further growing, based on the reporting that's out there, Greg Sankey wasn't even on the call. I've been telling you this for a while, and this is one of the things that, look, not everybody has the same stamina to pay attention to these sort of issues. A lot of this gets a little bit confusing over time. The thing you need to know about the direction that college sports is moving. The SEC is not a voice in this whatsoever. The SEC is not leading on any of this right now. The SEC is essentially just adopting everything the Big Ten is proposing at a slower rate than the Big Ten seems to be moving. The Big Ten's out in front. They make the proposal. Eventually the SEC sort of goes along with it, I guess, the 2014 being an example of that. Josh Heupel's in favor of it. Kirby Smart certainly wasn't against it. And slowly the SEC, perhaps moving at the speed limit while the Big Ten speeds ahead, is eventually just landing the same place as everybody else. Right now, college sports are being led by one of two entities, either Cody Campbell or the Big Ten. Those are the two leaders. Cody Campbell wants to nationalize college football. The Big Ten essentially wants to privatize it. Those are the two leaders. The SEC is not a voice on either side of that discussion right now. They are simply trying to keep up with what the actual leaders want to do. And to me, that's a shame because A, I'm pro-SEC, and B, I think the current voices that have the prominent say here are not moving college football in a good direction. But when the SEC, through, I just think, a bad poker hand, got pushed into a 9-game conference schedule, I think Sankey lost the trust of his coaches and perhaps lost the platform to stand on to have any real voice in shaping where the future of college football is going. And I don't believe I'm overstating this. I really don't. Some might disagree. Smart people sometimes do. But I've tried to follow this pretty closely, and I don't see the SEC having any voice in any of this whatsoever. And I don't think a 2014 playoff is good for college football. But based on some stuff from a week ago, it seems like that's where all of this might be going. Let me give you one more story here before we wrap it up. We also found out last week the University of Arkansas is dropping its tennis programs. We don't talk about tennis here on this show, but this is interesting, A, because we predicted this a long time ago, that I don't care how much money you have, you can only spend it once. That college athletics, even though it seems like a really big business, the resource that this business cultivates, the revenue it generates, is finite. That if you spend it on one thing, you don't have it to spend on something else. That's just how any of this goes, and that ought not be that hard to explain. So now that football demands more and more money being pumped into it, there will be less money to pump into other things. There just will be. Football has already been footing the bill for every other sport on campus, almost, for a very long time, and its ability to do that in this current landscape is just going to be limited. That is just reality. We are forced to live in reality, and that is just reality. So we said you can either have college sports as we've known it, or you can completely reinvent it into something else. And people seem like they wanted, at least at one point anyway, they wanted to reinvent it into something else, which means that college sports are going to look a little bit different. There just simply will be less sports. There just simply will. Tennis being the first example of this. The only solution I see to this problem for people who want their school to have a tennis program, I don't think that Georgia's on the verge of eliminating it, because Georgia has a pretty big tennis history. I'm guessing Arkansas might not have. Georgia has obviously a very big tennis history, so I'm not that worried about that at Georgia right now, but just across college sports in general. The only solution I see for this, and it's amazing to me that nobody ever brings this up, if the school likes the idea of having a million sports, sometimes we talk about Olympic sports, women's sports, things like that. If the school likes the idea of having all these sports, then can I make a humble suggestion that maybe the school ought to pay for them? Because, as I've said plenty of times before, you think there's a lot of money in college athletics, but that amount of money is dwarfed by the money that exists in actual college. The college and university business is a gigantic business. In the SEC in particular, business is very, very good. Stories get written about this all the time. Explosion in applications at places like Alabama and Ole Miss and places like that, simply because a bunch of people from outside this region watch SEC football on TV on Saturday and says, boy, let me get some of that. Let me go down there and go to school, because that looks a lot more fun than this perpetual winter that I live in, 9 months out of the year up here where I live. Let me go down there and enjoy some of that. Those kids look like they're having a very good time. College athletics has been an amazing marketing tool for actual college. And if the actual colleges like having tennis teams, I would suggest from the academic coffers, they probably ought to pay for that and make things a little easier on the athletic department for a change. Because as it stands now, the college athletics departments are shouldering a pretty heavy load. They've got to find a way to keep football funded to the extent that football that can fund all the other sports and keep the lights on at the university. Because let me tell you something. If you stripped athletics away from the actual college, what do you think the favorability rating would be for the actual academic part of college here right now? In a day and age in which a college degree has never been more expensive, the usefulness of that degree has never been more called into question than it currently is. If you stripped college athletics away from the actual college, what would the favorability ratings be for those colleges right now, given the experience that people are having separate from the sports world in college overall? My guess is not great. So if the actual colleges like the PR benefit they get from the sports, maybe I let it chip in and pay for some of them. And there's actually far less of that going on than you probably realize, but that might need to change. That'd be my suggestion anyway. We'll make that your SEC through. Speaking of the NFL draft, which we talked quite a bit about today, and we'll do more of tomorrow, one of our good folks in our audience had a chance to be in Pittsburgh for the NFL draft, and what an amazing scene that was on television. Hundreds of thousands of folks there in Pittsburgh there for that, including a golden shoe going out today to Gary Marks, who writes in to say he tagged me and Jeff on this. I had a great time at the NFL draft in the Berg celebrating UGA. Now I love this. He says, I can confirm no Gator fans present. I love that, Gary. And why would those lousy, stinking Gators be at the NFL draft? That's for the good football players. And of course, we know Florida doesn't have nearly enough of those. But how about these pictures from Gary all around Pittsburgh, including a picture of Darnell Washington's hand, actual size there on that. Lots of Super Bowl rings for the Steelers, a flagship organization. Just an amazing, amazing scene there for Gary in Pittsburgh. We appreciate him sharing those pictures. We'll give him a golden shoe. Speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, we are getting so close to 2,000. By the way, on day 2,000 for our Gator Hater Updater, I do have a fun little thing I'm going to show off, which will be really cool. But anyway, getting close to about 1,997 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. We call that a Gator Hater Updater. Good to be back with y'all today. See you here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, outfitted by Johnny O. We'll talk to you then, everybody. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, they show up on time, do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. All right, good stuff. Thrilled to have Johnny O as part of the program. Thrilled to be here for the RS Andrews Cooldown as well. Missed you all last week. Hope you enjoyed being with each other. Just all really good stuff. All right, let's get some comments and see how everybody's doing. See what's on everybody's mind. Rambo says, with all those draft picks, talent, Ohio State couldn't win their conference, lost in their first playoff game. Kirby would be catching hell for a similar circumstance. To a certain extent, I understand what you're saying, but also these were key players in a team that won the national championship just the year before. So I know there's going to be a debate. So many first-round picks to Ohio State underachieve. You know, I mean, if you look at what Georgia did over the course of the 2022-23 NFL draft, I mean, Ohio State's 2-year haul is going to be pretty similar to that. They were clearly, disappointed to lose in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff, of course. But this is a team that's only 1 year removed from a national championship, so I can't necessarily go too far with that. Tyler Puglisi says, any word on when they'll announce if it's going to be a 2014 playoff? So here's the way that works. They recently signed a new playoff deal. So we know that it's going to be 12 for this year. And technically, they have a contract for a 12-team playoff for like another 7 years. But it's also a contract, I believe, that can be broken at any time. So I believe if they want to change the playoff format for 2027, which we think there's a very good chance they will, if they want to change the playoff format for 2027, I think the date for announcing that is like, I'm not quite sure about. I want to say it's like October or something like that. That there is a drop dead. I think that's just for logistical challenges. But I want to say it's sometime during the season. I want to say it's like sometime in the fall that if they want to change the format for 2027, they can change it anytime. But logistically, to be ready for it, I think the latest they can do it is like October, I want to say. Double check me on the when on that. But I do believe it's sometime in the fall if they want to change it for next year. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says 12 or 16 teams is the sweet spot, more than I think we see a ton of blowouts and injuries. I don't have a problem with 16. If they expanded to 16, Paul's can see, if they expanded to 16, no problem with that for me. 24 is just too many. 24 is just too much of a good thing. And when your only idea for increasing your revenue is expanding your inventory, then you're devaluing your product. This is true for any business ever. Any business ever. I love baseball cards. Baseball cards were mega popular when I was a kid. But the manufacturers noticed how popular the baseball cards were. And so somewhere around the early 90s, they said, people love baseball cards. We can make a whole lot more money. All we've got to do is just print a whole bunch more of them. And they did. And what happened? They said, we can increase our revenue by expanding our inventory. And eventually, they devalued the product. And it didn't take very long for that to happen. And if you're holding a bunch of baseball cards from the early 90s, you already know they are worthless. Worthless. No value at any price because there's just too many of them. And if college football is not careful, it could see the same thing happen. We've talked about this plenty. This is not a made-up concern. This is a real concern. You can devalue your product. We see this across sports right now. And if you try to trade one fan base for the other, as I've pointed out endless times, if you try to trade one fan base for the other, get out of the rural South and more into the big urban metros, a lot of folks try to do that too, and that doesn't usually work either. Jonathan Aaron says, what player, drafted or free agent, do you think fits the best with their new team? It's a good question. I mean, I'll tell you this. I mean, I know it's an easy answer. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. I love Zachariah Branch and the Falcons. I do. I mean, I think the Falcons need wide receiver help. I think it's really cool to the extent to which the Falcons have now embraced Georgia in a way that they obviously never did before. And I don't know how seriously I took the Falcons drafting Georgia players thing in the past, but the fact that they have made such a concerted effort on that now would lead you to believe that maybe they were ignoring Georgia earlier. But I do love Branch the Falcon. I think that could be great. Dean Ellie says Ohio State hasn't won their conference since 2020. Ryan Day was one game away from being fired. He's lucky he got to play Tennessee in the playoff after that Michigan loss. Yeah, I mean, I can't quite. I mean, I see what you're saying. I can't quite go there. I mean, they won the national championship. I mean, yeah, they lost a couple of times to Michigan, but Michigan also won a national championship. I mean, I know people there are going to want to try to make a thing out of Ohio State having so many first-round picks and not advancing in this year's playoff. Honestly, I would say we got our own problems to worry about. And, you know, our problems may not be that big, but if that's true, then Ohio State's problems aren't that big either. That I really can't do the Ohio State is underachieving. I just can't. They won a national championship, and they won it fairly convincingly. I think they're doing fine. I do. I think they're doing fine. And I would love for that not to be the case. Y'all, I mean, there's nobody that's not only pro-Georgia. I'm pro-SEC. I'd love to be the, Big Ten over. I'd love to do all that. But I don't really feel like right now that would come from a very authentic place for me. I think Ohio State's doing just fine. Randy Hall says, please mention Micah Morris going to the Eagles. Yeah, you love the fact that the Eagles have drafted so many dogs. That's so fun. Bill Sanders says they bought the national championship. There's a difference. I just don't see a difference. I don't. I mean, we are living in the NIL age, and there is no asterisk for, well, they bought it, especially given the fact that the price they supposedly paid to buy it is about half of what teams are paying this year. And I mean, there's also a ton of homegrown talent on that team too. I would listen, there'd be no easier audience win for me than to jump up and down and say, you know, they bought a national championship one year and with all these first round draft picks, they fell on their face the next year. I'd love to say that. But that just doesn't seem to come from a very real place to me. Any team that wins a national championship moving forward bought the championship. There is no team that didn't buy a championship moving forward. Now, can you buy it at a discount? We're about to try to find out, because that's what certainly Georgia's trying to do. But there is no team moving forward that will have gotten a national championship without paying a significant sum for it. That's just not going to happen. That's what college ball is now. Brooke Dog says Indiana bought a national championship, but they are still national champions. If Georgia had the billionaire donor to buy a championship, we would do it also. But even the teams that don't have the billionaire donor are still trying to buy a championship, and they're going to somehow try to figure out a way to do it. Brian Whitaker says other conferences want to see the SEC fail because they're tired of the SEC dominance. That's probably true to a certain extent. Also, listen, most media is not from the South. It's just not, and it never has been, and it never will be. Most media is not from the South. So perhaps not a coincidence that, you know, the conversation sounds the way it sounds. Most media is not from the South. And there was a time when if you were from the South, you better learn to sound like you're not from the South, otherwise you couldn't get a job. That's not quite as true as it once was, but still, it's just a given that if you want to work in media, especially broadcast media, you either better not be from the South or you better not sound like from the South. So perhaps not a coincidence that the conversation sounds the way that it does. Jim and Sharon Caldwell pointing out that both Diego Pavia and Haynes King went undrafted. They did sign. I don't know, it's sign. I guess in Pavia's case, he got invited to participate in the Baltimore Ravens, I think, their rookie mini camp, and Haynes King went somewhere. Let's see what else. Jim Blair mentions NASCAR. We've talked about this plenty. I mean, we've been saying this for years around here. That as recently as 2006, which if you're 20 years ago is a long time. If you're not 20 years ago feels like, in some cases, 5 seconds ago. This is internet age. This is almost the span of time since the iPhone's been around, almost. This is what I would think of as modern times. In the modern times, modern era, well into the 21st century, NASCAR was the second most popular sport in America. We've talked about this so many times. But NASCAR itself thought it was too rural and too southern, and they could just make those changes. The folks in the boardrooms were talking about all the money they could make. So they made those changes, and it's a fraction of as popular as it once was. I do believe that college football could have the same fate. I really do. I really, really do. I think if college football takes a misstep here, it could have a similar fate. It's got to be careful. How about this? Gregory Bradley says his family owns 2 Ty Cobb signed baseballs and a glove. Ty, obviously the Georgia Peach from Royston, Georgia. If that's the case, that's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Also, we don't talk a lot Ty Cobb around here. I would invite people to read about Ty Cobb. One of the most fascinating figures in all of baseball because, and you can do the research on this yourself, been done plenty. Probably the most unfair portrayal, the historical memory of Ty Cobb, almost completely different than the actual person was. And this has been well documented. And we don't have time to get into this right now, but worth a read about how unfair Ty Cobb has been treated by history compared to what the man himself actually probably was. Randy Hall says, can you name the 6 first-round offensive tackles Kirby's produced? So, obviously, Freeling, Mims, Broderick Jones, Isaiah Wilson, Isaiah Wynn technically would have counted as a tackle because that's what he played at Georgia when he was drafted, and Andrew Thomas. And, by the way, Andrew Thomas is like maybe one of the best offensive tackles in all the NFL right now. By the way, Wyatt says the video boards from the concert came straight from WrestleMania. He says you'll like this. Fun times on Saturday. Go Dogs. Hope you enjoyed the cruise. It was a great time, Wyatt. Appreciate that. Yeah, the staging setup looked awesome. It looked like a really big-time event. And seeing Kirby on stage was fun. Jonathan Aaron says, who's a better fit, C.J. Allen to Indianapolis or Dalen Everett to Pittsburgh? The truth is I'm not a big enough NFL fan to really know. I think both guys have a chance to be really good. But in terms of their fit with their actual team, I don't know. I don't know that I know enough about the NFL to say that. Gary Holt says college football is like a small business trying to compete with Walmart. Along those lines, I'm assuming the Walmart in this case, maybe the NFL. Along those lines, I do think it's really interesting that there's a lot of chatter out there about how there's less overall draft capital now because of NIL. Guys are staying in school. I think that college football should use that to its benefit. Because here's the thing. I was thinking about this over the course driving back from Port Canaveral. I was just thinking about things. I don't think that people fully realize the extent to which the college football isn't a battle. And the reason why people don't see to realize that college football is battling for its future is because nobody's fighting. But for the most part, when you see people fighting, a lot of times that's just pretend. Stephen A. Smith fighting with whoever on First Take, they're not really trying to win the argument. They're trying to keep you watching. A lot of times you see people fighting in Congress, a lot of that's just to generate interest for themselves. The goal is not necessarily to win. That oftentimes when you see fighting taking place, that's not really evidence of a battle. That's just evidence of, hey, look at me. But when you see an actual battle taking place, what people are trying to do is win. They are grinding behind the scenes trying to win. And there's a battle going on for college football's future right now. Not evidenced by fighting, but it's a true, legitimate battle nonetheless. And one of the entities you're fighting against the NFL. And it doesn't seem like it because they're not arguing with each other. But the NFL is encroaching more and more and more into college football's TV windows. And there's not much that college football can do about that because the NFL is so popular on television. The NFL just owns television, dominates it. And so if the NFL bullies you for a television window, they're going to win because they have bigger audiences. Your best product can't compete with what the NFL puts out. Just simple as the NFL dominates on television. So I've always felt like, well, if you're college football and you want to fight back against that, you can't fight back on the battlefield that the NFL is most comfortable. You got to fight back somewhere else. And this is a place where I do think that college football has the potential to actually win a battle against the NFL. You can reduce their workforce, and you can make them feel it. You really can. The NFL has said, we don't want to touch these guys until they're out of high school for 3 years. Well, that creates an opportunity for college football to say, well, then if you don't want them for 3 years, we're going to take them, and they're our guys now. And I think I mentioned this the other day. This is an abstract thought, but we're moving into a future where, like, say, the PGA Tour is going to look at the four majors and say, if you're using our guys, we want some sort of marketing allowance for the fact that our players are in your event. In other words, if you want our workforce to participate in your event, we want a taste of the success that you're generating from that. If I'm college football, I'm exploring every opportunity because third thing that Roger Goodell says about all these first-round picks, it's their name, it's their position, and the third most important thing, according to the NFL, is where they went to college. It's free development and free marketing for at least 3 years for these guys before coming to the NFL. Maybe that's not supposed to be free anymore. Something to consider. Let's see what else. I've started a Ty Cobb conversation in the Facebook comment section. Alan Verbonchik says proponents of NIL are second guessing it now. I don't know if that's so much true as people say, well, we want this to change, or at least some people said. And then when it changes, they sometimes say, no, not like that. And the whole point that a lot of us have tried to make is that institutions that exist for 125 years are it creates a very complex system. And people who've never built anything think they know how to tear this down without irreparably changing what has made it special. And obviously sometimes that's not the case. I also think this too. It's like, I get a little bit tired of, and we see this from a lot of people. Sometimes even Kirby Smart says this. They talk about saving college football, to the extent that it needs saving. They talk about saving college football. And the number one argument they always make for why it should be saved is because it's a good way that the other sports, hey, we can keep Olympic sports. We can do this, the other sports on campus. I'd love to hear somebody just step up and say, I want to save college football for its own sake, not that college football has value beyond just its ability to fund the other sports. I'd love to hear somebody make that argument. Let's see what else. Jim and Sheridan Caldwell checking out. Brian Wicker pointing out Mets and Phillies tied for last place in the National League East right now. You love that. Spencer Clark also mentioning Tyrus Raymond Cobb in here. There's also is it a Matthew Stafford Stetson Bennett debate here? The Ty Simpson drafting by the Rams was pretty interesting. Seems like there's some drama there that doesn't sound like Sean McVay was all that plugged into this. Didn't necessarily know it was going to happen. Sounds like Les Snead and Ty's dad had a relationship with each other. Like a lot of this is, I barely know enough to be dangerous. But it seems like that might be pretty interesting. Jeremy Smith pointing out the Braves are the only major league team not to lose a series yet this year. Let's do a couple more. Gary Holt also mentioning the run the Braves are on. All right, one or two more, then we're going to go. Between the Hedges says, I haven't watched NASCAR since 2008. Yeah, I mean, it's a real shame. It really is. I guess like the one thing that I'm a big believer in is there's nothing wrong with just being a regional sport. There really is nothing wrong with that. And, you know, I mentioned during the show that like you got like Cody Campbell saying his stuff and the 2014 playoff people are saying their stuff. Everybody seems to think, oh, man, there's so much more money that college football can make. Well, in some cases, there probably is. I mean, the SEC clearly negotiated a bad media rights deal. They are clearly undervalued. Better negotiations could have gotten them better dollars. Best example of this is, A, the TV ratings, but B, the fact that they brought in Texas and Oklahoma, which made the league far tougher because these are two gigantic programs. But while the SEC did get prorated value for adding a 15th and a 16th team, they didn't get premium value for those two teams being Texas and Oklahoma, gigantic football programs. There was no premium given to the SEC for bringing in the typically very tough opponents. So the SEC clearly could have negotiated a better media rights deal. That's fairly obvious. But this notion that college football overall is going to, you know, generate media rights far in excess of what it currently has and better than the other professional sports leagues. I mean, college football is clearly the second most popular sport in America. Clearly is. But the big media companies are, I believe anyway, never going to have the same relationship with college football that they have with the other sports leagues. They're just never going to. Part of that's because college football is not international. It never will be. And also because, you know, college football fans are not New York, LA, Chicago. It's Greenville, Birmingham, Memphis. Large number of people, but not located by and large in the places where, you know, the main media companies like to do their business. All right, we're going to go. Let's finish with Jerry Popham here, who says, who's trying to kid who? NIL makes it a pro sport to treat like the pro teams do. The college should own the player and rights for the length of a mandated contract. So some of that, though, now keep in mind, is that the colleges could sign multi-year deals now if they wanted to. They just don't want to. And we're probably glad they don't. It's frustrating when you're having to like renegotiate a deal every single year. But the flip side is you invest multi-years in a player that turns out just not to be good enough. And sometimes that happens. And if you follow pro sports, I mean, this is an issue in pro sports all the time. This gigantic multi-year contract for a player ends up just not being worth it. And that hamstrings the pro sports team's ability to do what it wants to do. Colleges do try to avoid that. And one of the ways they try to avoid that is by only signing, for the most part, one-year deals. There may be some multi-year deals, but most teams don't want that because it just becomes your problem if the player ends up not being good enough. And most teams are happy to pay players what they're worth once they demonstrate their worth. What they don't love doing is, and this is where Kirby Smart's probably ahead of the curve a little bit, they don't love paying a ton on potential. They don't love doing that because even the guys who do this for a living at the NFL level, they oftentimes end up being wrong. That projecting how good a player is going to be just by how he looks in his uniform is actually not all that easy to do. All right, we're going to go. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Talked to Dari last night. He had some good things going on. Dari's good guy, great supporter of Georgia, loves Georgia fans, love hanging out with him, great guy. And it's hot. I mean, like hot. I feel like we're in that warm weather season now. That means your air conditioning unit's got to be ready for it. And if yours is not, R.S. Andrews can help you. So find him online, rsandrews.com. For your air conditioning upgrade, getting that thing tuned up, old unit. A lot of the things that can cause a unit to break down, R.S. Andrews can recognize before it happens and get you another summer out of that unit. Somebody's probably told you eventually needs to be replaced. Maybe not this year. Maybe one more good year out of that. R.S. Andrews can show you how. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. It's great to be back with you. DawgNation Daily, outfitted by Johnny O. We'll talk to you tomorrow, everybody.